Hello there, I'm Susan Nash, and I'm here to talk to you today about some relatively urgent situations that are occurring right now in terms of supply chain, basically in the entire globe. I'm talking today late April 27th, 2020, and what we're seeing now is only going to get more intense as we go on. So really want to address this issue from the point of view of where growth is likely to occur, where we're going to see investment and why, and how that investment will satisfy countries and communities who have said, never again are we going to be caught with no personal protective equipment, totally dependent on a single source of supplies, and no longer are we going to be in a situation where we potentially are going to have to plow under crops and risk famine, and at the very least extremely high prices, and in potentially no availability for important foods. And that the same goes to basically medicines and pharmaceuticals, all kinds of critical life necessities. So basically, talking about how to repurpose capacity, especially in a time where we're not seeing a lot of capacity being used or because of just the extreme downturn, commodities prices, etc. And then also where and how to invest in appropriate, small is beautiful, appropriate technology. To mention E.F. Schumacher, in order to weather this COVID-19 storm. So in doing so, we can end dependency on sole source imports and potentially avoid hunger. I'm saying in America, but basically in other parts of the world. So should probably change that, say avoid hunger in the world, even though we know that we're never able to avoid all hunger in the world, unfortunately. So let's just move forward here. So check out this idea that COVID-19 is basically a global, slow-moving tsunami. And in the span of a mere few months, much of the world went from a state of basically exuberant self-actualization to the most primal level of survival, health, food, shelter, and security. So basically we have survival and security, and essentially that's driving the decisions. So where will investment go in the next 18 to 24 months is the key question. Well, we know it won't go into oil and gas exploration, not with price of oil negative $37. Well, that was a one-time thing, we hope. But still, it's not much better at $10 a barrel. And then airlines, cruise ships, alternative energy, unfortunately, all those things are just not going to be attracting investment because we have overcapacity. The problem now is where to store all the oil that's being produced. So here we have some stacked rigs offshore. We also see stacked airplanes, American Airlines in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the quest to strengthen, or the quest for strengthening the supply chain with food, medicine, security is just beginning. And we can basically say that we will be able to watch investment in supply chain focused manufacturing and infrastructure becoming more and more important. And just to get back to this idea, we went from basically exuberant self-actualization in some cases to now just the most basic physiological needs of air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. We're basically there. And COVID-19 has basically taken that all of our security and all those levels, the safe, away from us. So remember, on Maslow's hierarchy, you have to have those basic needs filled before you can even have enough freedom to think about your safety needs, your love and belonging, affiliation needs, your esteem needs, and finally self-actualization. So, as we know, COVID-19 not only sickens a person or people, it affects the supply chain. Food, medical supplies, key intermediaries, and factories. And why is this? Well, factories have been shut down due to illness, but also with the global lockdown, we're seeing things hung up in ports for months, just unable to move. We're seeing things hung up in different places along this supply chain. So we're getting some shock shutdowns. Agricultural production and processing, they're being shut down due to illness, due to lack of the ability to get key equipment. We're seeing a shock to this food supply, medical supplies, pharmaceutical precursors for anything that from antibiotics to, in the case of the Mexican cartel, methamphetamine precursors and transportation. So, again, as we mentioned at the beginning, many countries are now saying, never again are we going to be dependent on a single source, so that even if we manage to not get sick, our factories close down because we can't get the pieces, the parts, the inputs, the supply, that we need in order to keep our factories moving. So basically, every country's been plunged into the same situation, and there's a desire for security. So how do we get started, and how do we help guide that? Because not all pain points are going to be the same. We'll have to identify the pain points and then prioritize them. What are actually the consequences? So where will investment be directed from 2020 to 2022? Obviously, strengthening national and local supply chains to avoid serious shortages of food, medicine, essential equipment, transportation, warehousing, storage, just to mention a few. Those are things we mentioned a minute ago. Water processing, storage, smart systems for optimizing production. So smart systems are more important than ever because they are the great equalizer, and they allow us to basically be able to make sure that smaller enterprises are cost efficient and they're agile, nimble, flexible. Also, intermediary warehouses can be repurposed, big box stores, mall spaces. There's another desire to have inventory not just next to the factory or next to the port, but also, or somewhere in a massive distribution center across the country or in a different country, but also to have it fairly local. And also the same goes for medical equipment and supplies. So what are the things that we can do? If we have a transportation company, if we have a cruise ship, if we have oil and gas operations, we've got unused capacity. Can we temporarily repurpose all that to prevent hunger and help our nation recover jobs and help your own nation recover jobs? The industries that will essentially cease operations can survive by generating cash flow. So it's basically a win-win. If your cruise ship or your airplanes or your oil and gas operations are shut down and you have zero cash flow but a lot of inflow and a lot of outflow still, Is there any way that you can stay alive? You can if you are nimble and agile and you can repurpose and you can pivot into one of the areas where there's an urgent security need. So you're basically sitting there. Where are the pain points? They're right along that lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of demands. They're right there in the shelter and the food and the medicine and the health levels of needs. So let's think about this. Oil and gas exploration, production, transportation. Can we reuse equipment and capabilities? Can we switch to generating electricity for on-site manufacturing, server farms? Can we use that transportation for, say, delivering milk instead of oil? I mean, can we get things certified for other purposes? And can we do it quickly? And also in refining, can we switch to the grades where there are still needs in long-haul transportation and generators? In other words, diesel. In tourism, can we transform for safety? What can we do with tourism? Can we use some of the beaches, some of the areas, can we make them safe and also help people essentially with their mental health as well as their physical health have outlets? Can we turn some of the unused capabilities and capacity for housing? All kinds of things. Air travel. How much can we turn to cargo, especially for things that are light, like tools, spare parts, lightweight things that are absolutely critical, chips, lightweight computer items, all kinds of things. Because we know we're doing a lot more in distance. Do we need to use airplanes to build up capacity and capabilities to boost our bandwidth in certain places that just do not have robust systems? So do we need to go ahead and accelerate installation of 5G? Okay, I said that almost deliberately because a lot of people are like, 5G? Well, so anyway, do we need to investigate 5G more? But at any rate, hospitality convert to flexible labor needs. So for example, do you need to have people working in the pork plant? Do we need to have people who can pick crops? Where can we use the unused capabilities to shelter and provide housing for people, safe housing? So I could go on for weeks talking about the different issues and areas. So right now we'll just quickly go through things. But I want to also talk about essentially the theory and idea of import substitution. So in import substitution, in the past, people have said, import substitution, that's a bad thing. It's not efficient and it leads to protectionism. Now we're rethinking and thinking, not such a bad idea. It's a safety net for the supply chain, and it's a strategic reserve for critical food, energy, medical equipment, supplies, all sorts of things. So instead of waiting on some kind of import, if we have a substitute on hand that's produced and kept in our own economies, then at least we have a backup, right? And also we can avoid the dependency on sole sources. And we can use technology to improve economies of scale. So we've gotten ourselves in a problem because we've embraced economies of scale, and we have some massive super producers, massively large pork processing, poultry processing. We have huge hog farms, and that has actually gotten us in trouble in the past too, especially when we have outbreaks of things like avian flu or swine flu. Entire herds have to be murdered or killed, or, it's just so sad. So instead of that, what we have to do is make sure that we have more flexibility in the system so that if one goes down because of lack of labor, it does not jeopardize our entire supply of say, meat or protein in the nation, and it does not result in spoilage and the meaningless, empty sacrifice of these poor little piglets' lives. Anyway, so at any rate, we have to think about these things. And if we have to, the sad thing is if they have to slaughter the pigs because they can't afford to continue to feed them, it's just 100% waste. So if we have a network of small is beautiful, appropriately sized, custom pork or different kinds of slaughterhouse. I hate that word, but I guess it's the real word that you have to use. So if you have that, then you can basically choose among places to send your pigs, your little piglets. So you have a smaller chance of waste, and you have a larger chance to be able to actually process quickly, efficiently, and economically the pigs. So anyway, I thought about this. Operation Pork Lift. There really is such a thing as a pork lift, but it's basically a pork mover, and it's kind of like a little dolly that you move around with the pork. But I thought, it looks like a forklift, but it's a pork lift. But I think about this. We could, as other industries that have unused capacity, could step in, and whenever there's an emergency, I'm talking about Operation Pork Lift, but it could easily be chick lift, chicken lift, asparagus lift, strawberry lift. Now, wherever it is where you've got something, where you have a need, it's an intervention to help processing plants that are having to shut down due to lack of a healthy labor force. So first, you identify the beleaguered pork processing facilities. Needs assessments. What do they need? Are there substitute slaughterhouses that you can go to? Or do they need to send in troops, basically send in the pork, send in the pork workers? And then also, do you need on-demand transportation? Is the problem with there's not enough, there are not enough trucks to haul? Do you have pork lift? Is the problem warehousing? Well, let's do repurposed restaurants, repurposed whatever for warehousing. Is the problem not enough demand for restaurants, and that commercial food supply chain has been damaged? Well, let's think about moving these into retail and have alternative methods of distribution. But the main thing is just identify where those challenges are, and once you identify them, and once we do heat maps to develop the urgency of them, an idea of the urgency, we can start moving ahead with a solution. So let's think about some of these, questioning these eternal verities of economics. One is rethinking comparative advantage. We import from countries because they have comparative advantage. We can produce goods so that the cost to import them, even with transportation and storage, costs less than to import the product. For example, pineapples can be grown in Hawaii, shipped to stores in the continental U.S. for much less than it would cost to grow pineapples in a greenhouse. But what happens if the ports are closed and there are no container ships? Well, to transport the pineapple, then, comparative advantage falls apart. Yeah, you might have a comparative advantage, but you can't get it anyplace. Get it out. And also there are more competitive wrinkles. Sometimes competitive advantage or comparative advantage is an illusion because the producer has been gaming the system by toying with exchange rates. For example, There's been protectionism, or gaming the system by constructing walls of tariffs and protectionism, or gaming the system by friendly loans and basically being a silent partner. And maybe gaming the system in order to destroy the competition with the last man standing strategy. Last man standing obviously would result in oligopoly, global domination, and then they think, yes, I'm the last man standing. I own all the pineapple production capability in the world. Fine. But in a pandemic, it kind of doesn't even help for you to be the last man standing because you're not going to be able to produce. So what good did it do? And then it's going to, and then the comparative advantage makes when people find that they're dependent on oligopolies, they become angry and say, I'm going to do anything I can to not be dependent on this one source. So anyway, let's go to the action steps. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm going to publish a paper too so that you can have the paper. But let's say step one is a needs assessment. Identify the pain points. What are the most urgent needs that have the highest level of negative consequences? This needs assessment is also a risk assessment, and I highly recommend doing a heat map. So the ones that end up in the red zone are the first ones that you would address. Step two, capacity assessment. Capacity assessment is talking about your unused capacity and how you can repurpose it. What do you actually have? Here's a warehouse with some robots. That's nice. So what do you have on hand? What can you get? What would you like to have in terms of the products, in terms of warehousing space? What can you store? And can you create informal new warehouses if the time comes? If you find something that's really effective, it's really close to your market, and you need to have not just in time, but you need to have a buffer warehouse. Think about where you can have those intermediary warehouses. Also, think about substitutes. What are your urgent needs? Think of the triage, dealing with the urgent needs first, then propose local alternatives. And at least have 2 or 3 possible alternatives. And then as you're identifying the alternatives, ask, what's keeping you from having those alternatives on site? And also, what are people lacking in order to get your objective accomplished? And then let's look at those substitutes. How appropriate are they? How effective are they? How much do they cost? Step 4, proposing solutions. So first we'll look at short-term solutions. So if you have a company and you're just shuttered right now because of COVID-19, you desperately want to keep your people working, then start looking at where there are short-term needs and see if you can step in and fill that gap. You don't really have time to build anything. You don't have any capex to do that anyway. You don't have a 20-month, 48-month lead time, but you can step in and help. So use your labor that you have on hand, create a new army, use your transportation that you have, use your warehouse, and look at areas where the need is most urgent, thinking of perishable items. Step in there first. Also, when health and livelihoods are at risk, step in there too. Not just people who are infected with COVID-19, but the people who have been so negatively affected that their health is desperately in jeopardy, or their families, or their issues where people need goods and services and they just cannot get them. Also, different kinds of medicine. Okay, so proposing solutions. Here we have some long-term solutions, and those have to do more with import substitution, improving the economies of scale so small factories can be profitable, rethinking comparative advantage, small, local, flexible can be economic, and also small-scale manufacturing that can utilize things like 3D printing, can switch over and do a number of different things in the same site to meet a number of local and regional needs. Okay, step 4, proposing solutions. Here's same thing. So we'll go ahead and just a different photograph. Here's a small line, packaging, etc. Import substitution. So, which imports can we most easily substitute or supplement? Where are we most vulnerable? Where are the imports creating a terrible problem now? And let's think about which are the imports that if we suddenly could not get them, it would dramatically negatively impact our people, our economy, our future. So let's think about it. Where can we use technology to make small-scale operations more flexible and economic? Where can we export our production? They could be local markets exporting. Where can we repurpose capacity? Where we've talked about that. And proactively develop agility and capacity by developing contracts, arrangements, memos of understanding for new business arrangements. Help be a facilitator, also a negotiator. So obviously you're going to need permits, insurance. What type of things will you require to get from point A to B? So look at your critical path, decision points, etc. Now I'm mentioning this because I just think that it's pretty interesting and ironic that Mexican drug cartels seem to be agile and nimble in ways that more formal organizations are not. So I was reading an article about how much of the many of the precursors for methamphetamine, for fentanyl, for, quote, bath salts, came from Wuhan, China, a state-supported chemical factory. And I don't know if that was part of some kind of devious, evil plan to do informal destruction, destroy the U.S. from within, or if it was something just completely amoral, or, well, actually immoral, but amoral. Okay, we don't care. Just so we're creating this this precursor for Adderall or something, and Ritalin, and we don't care if you're not actually using it for that. You're using it for some illicit purpose. So I don't know. Who knows? But drug cartels, when they found they couldn't get their precursors, started contracting chemists to start developing their own labs. So I'm thinking, if they're able to do that and do it quickly, isn't it possible to do that sort of thing for good as well as evil? I think so. Let's do it. Step 6, opening or closed manufacturing facilities. So it's going to take a long time to open up a new car assembly plant or a new assembly line, anything. But let's look at things that were just recently shut down. And let's say as far back as 2019, 2018. Is there anything there that we can still use? Is it possible to get the equipment back, or is the equipment still there? Was it just in the process of being shut down? At any rate, think about it. And I'd say that probably some of the priorities and most likely things to have would be like tires, parts for vehicles, heating and climate control systems, water processing, refrigeration units, things like that. And anything that has to do with food preservation, processing, canning, freezing, freeze drying, desiccation, turning things into powder, like powdered milk, all those types of things. Hospitals, motels, etc. Can we multi-purpose them for other things, like turning those into regional, rural telemedicine centers? Also, pharmaceuticals, precursors for key medicines, delivery systems, little capsules, and that too is produced in China. Some illuminating, right? All the little capsules and time-release things. Okay, so we're getting close to our final step, step 7. Let's think about labor. So let's think about a temporary army for Tysons or other critical plants. So, it just seems like a terrible shame. We have, 20%, 30%, 40% unemployment, yet where companies are not able to get labor to work to keep from having all of the production and all of this food destroyed and spoiled so let's think about labor, flexibility, labor, mobility, and employ every single technological trick in the bag, trick that we have. So we have ZipRecruiter, we have all these different apps we've had for a long time. Remember Monster.com, all those things. There's no reason why we can't get workers to the critical jobs. There's no reason. And there's no reason why we can't make those workplaces somewhat safer. So here we are. See, we have flexible plexiglass between the workers. Those are basically sneeze guards. And so then they can bleach them at the end of each shift. So give the workers the equipment they need to be safe, provide training, and also provide backup. So that the worker feels sick, they stay home. It's much better to have to pay extra money for the end product because people have had to build in more safety than to throw it away altogether and have no food, or then it's outrageously expensive. Okay, so let's talk about coexisting with COVID-19. I'm just basically thinking, as we think, we need to make sure that we understand what we are doing when we emotionally react to something. And if we are building in cognitive bias, so are we suddenly falling into overly negative thinking? Are we being rigid? Are we predicting doom and gloom? Are we fortune telling? What are we doing? And also think about thoughts create feelings, feelings create behaviors. So if you can monitor your thoughts, then thoughts beget feelings. Feelings beget behavior. Thoughts beget behavior as well. So, and your behavior creates thoughts, but in the very middle is being aware, awareness. And sometimes we're not aware. We need somebody to talk to us, to help us work through some of the things that may be invisible to us. It's really important. So we can look back, learn from our challenges. And finally, brainstorm on every possible level. Supply chains are important, local, regional, national. Start with a group, brainstorm using the steps listed above. I've thought of some things like milk move, milk move, pork lift, food go, Med-equip. Anyway, just come up with cute names for things. Those aren't too cute. But anyway, just wanted to say that I hope that you found this to be useful. Please be in touch with me and let's do what we can to transform. And while we're in industries that are shuttered or kind of without hope, let's use them where people need it, and let's not only generate jobs, we also generate hope, generate product where we need it, and we'll build a better tomorrow. Anyway, thank you. I'm Susan Nash. Talk to you soon.